I want you to mentally transport yourself back to a very specific moment in time. It's the late 1990s, maybe the very early 2000s. The Soviet Union has collapsed. The Berlin Wall is a distant memory. The stock market is booming. There is this overwhelming, almost intoxicating sense of optimism in the air.
The end of history era.
Exactly. Francis Fukuyama's famous phrase, the vibe was that humanity had, finally figured it out. Liberal democracy and open trade were going to hold hands, skip into the sunset, and banish war forever.
It was a very seductive narrative.
It really was. It felt like the big questions had all been answered.
The idea was that economic interdependence, basically globalization, would make conflict obsolete.
Yeah.
The logic was simple. Why would you bomb a country that manufactures your car parts? It's bad for business.
Right. It felt like we were entering a post-conflict world. But then you have the source material we were covering today. This book lands in 2001, right at the peak of that party.
Yeah.
And it essentially dumps a bucket of ice water on everyone's head. We are doing a deep dive into The Tragedy of Great Power Politics by John J. Mearsheimer. And just looking at the summary and the chapter list, it is clear Mearsheimer wasn't buying the hype.
Not even a little bit. In fact, Mearsheimer is considered the titan of what's called offensive realism. While everyone else was looking at the fading Cold War and seeing a new era of peace, Mearsheimer looked at the deep structure of the international system and saw the inevitable return of conflict.
He basically said, enjoy the holiday because history is coming back.
That's a great way to put it.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just summarizing a book. We are unpacking a worldview. We want to understand Mearsheimer's thesis on why war might be, inevitable.
And what makes this book so compelling, and frankly a little terrifying, is that he argues conflict isn't the result of bad guys doing bad things.
Right. It's not about evil dictators or misunderstandings.
No. He argues that conflict is baked into the operating system of the world itself. That's the key word. Structure. Mearsheimer is a structuralist. He believes the game is rigged by the rules, regardless of who the players are.
And to understand why the game is rigged, you have to start with a foundational concept of his theory. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but he uses it in a very specific, very technical way.
Anarchy.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately because definitions matter here. When most people hear anarchy, they think of chaos. Burning cars, looting.
Right, but that's not what Mearsheimer means. Not at all. In international relations, anarchy doesn't mean chaos or disorder. It simply means the absence of a hierarchy.
Okay.
Think about it structurally. Inside a country, let's say the United States or France, if someone steals your car or threatens your life, what do?
I call the police. I call 911.
Right, because there is a higher authority, the government, that has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. There's a 911 you can call.
Right.
But now, zoom out to the international stage. If one great power decides to invade another, or if a superpower decides to blockade a smaller nation, who do they call?
Well, people would say, call the UN. Call the United Nations.
But can the UN actually stop a great power? I mean, if a superpower decides to ignore the UN, does the UN have an army that can swoop in, arrest the leader, and force them to comply?
Practically speaking, no.
Yeah.
Of course not.
Exactly. There is no global government. There is no supreme authority over states. That is what Mearsheimer means by anarchy. It's a system where there is no 9/11.
And because there is no higher authority to protect you?
States are forced into a self-help system. You are entirely 100% responsible for your own survival.
Which fundamentally changes the psychology of a nation. If I know there's no cop on the beat, I have to be armed. I have to be suspicious.
Precisely. And this leads us to the first major illusion Mearsheimer shatters. We talked about that 90s optimism, the idea that trade or shared values would save us. Mearsheimer looks at that and says, that's naive. The summary of the book explicitly mentions that he exposes the truth behind this rhetoric.
But hold on, let's push back on that for a second. It seems logical that democracies, effectively don't fight each other, or that trading partners wouldn't want to disrupt their economies. Why isn't that enough?
Because of one specific variable that Mearsheimer highlights over and over again.
Which is?
The uncertainty of intentions. You can know a country's capabilities. You can count their tanks, their missiles, their soldiers. That is hard data, but you can never, ever truly know their intentions.
Because intentions are in people's heads.
And they change. A country might be a friendly democracy today. You trust them. But can you guarantee what their leadership will look like in 10 years? In 20?
No, obviously not. Governments fall, moods shift.
Exactly. So In an anarchic world with no 9/11, where your neighbor has a loaded gun military power and you can't read their mind, their intentions, Mearsheimer argues you have to assume the worst.
You have to assume they might use that gun.
It's the only rational choice. And because survival is the primary goal, if you don't survive, nothing else matters. You must seek power to protect yourself.
So it's not paranoia, it's prudence.
He would say it's the only rational response to the structure. And this brings us to the core argument of the book, summed up in a single line: hegemony is the only insurance of security.
That is a heavy statement. The only insurance. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the only way to be 100% safe is to be so powerful that no one even dares to touch me.
Yes. But here is where Mearsheimer introduces a crucial distinction that often gets missed. He argues that global hegemony, ruling the entire world, is basically impossible.
Why?
And the reason for that is something he calls the stopping power of water.
Which sounds like a physics concept, but I assume he's talking about logistics.
He is. Oceans are incredibly difficult to cross with large invasion forces. It's one thing to send an aircraft carrier to project power. It's another thing entirely to conquer and occupy a country across the Atlantic or Pacific.
So no state can ever dominate the whole planet.
Correct. So if you can't rule the world, what's the goal?
The next best thing.
To be a regional hegemon. You want to be the Godzilla of your specific continent. You want to dominate your backyard so thoroughly that no other state in your region can possibly challenge you.
Like the United States and the Western Hemisphere.
Exactly. The U.S. is the textbook example. It dominates North and South America to the point where no other country in the hemisphere is a real security threat. That is the gold standard of safety.
Okay.
But, and here's the twist, once you achieve regional hegemony, what is your next priority?
Well, if I'm safe in my neighborhood, I guess I just relax and get rich.
Wrong. If you are a regional hegemon, your single biggest fear is that another regional hegemon will rise in a different part of the world.
Why? If they are over there and I'm over here, why do I care?
Because if they dominate their region, they don't have to worry about their neighbors anymore. They are free to roam. They can project power into your backyard. They can mess with your trade.
So the strategy of a regional hegemon is to prevent peer competitors from rising elsewhere.
You want to be the only hegemon in the system.
This connects directly to the tragedy in the title. It feels like a Greek tragedy, where the characters are doomed by fate. It implies that even if a country wants to be peaceful,
The moment it starts getting strong.
it becomes a threat to the existing powers.
That is the tragedy. It's structural. The rising power must seek to dominate its region to secure itself. The existing power must try to stop it to secure itself. There is no exit ramp. The structure forces them into conflict.
Let's talk about the tools of this conflict. I'm looking at the table of contents, and there are two chapters that seem to set up a debate: wealth and power, and the primacy of land power. Now, in the 21st century, we talk a lot about economic warfare, cyber warfare, drones, air supremacy. Does Mearsheimer really think land power, boots on the ground, is still the main metric?
He does, and this is often where people push back, but his logic is very specific. He acknowledges that wealth is critical. You need a massive economy to build a massive military, but wealth is just potential power. He argues that land power is the only form of power that can definitively settle political outcomes.
But why? If I can flatten your factories with airstrikes from thousands of feet up, haven't I won?
You've punished the enemy, sure, but air power and naval power can't occupy. They can't force a government to change its laws or its leadership.
Right.
To truly control a state, to make it do what you want, you have to be able to physically occupy its territory. And only an army land power can do that.
That feels almost archaic in our digital age, but I see the logic. You can't occupy a capital city with a submarine.
Exactly. And because land power is the ultimate threat, states pay very close attention to who has the biggest army on their continent.
Which leads us to the strategies for survival chapter. How do states actually deal with a rising threat?
Right. The table of contents lists balancing versus buck passing. These sound like distinct strategies. Let's break them down. Balancing sounds straightforward. It is. Balancing is the active strategy. If a power is rising and looking dangerous, you step up. You commit your own resources, your own soldiers to contain them. You might form a defensive alliance like NATO to say, if you cross this line, we all fight.
But balancing is expensive, and it's dangerous. If I step up to check the bully, I might get punched in the face.
Which is exactly why states often prefer the second option, buck passing.
Which is essentially saying, not it.
Not it, but more strategically, let's hope he does it. In buck passing, A threatened state tries to get another power to shoulder the burden of checking the aggressor,
You want someone else to pay the blood and treasure price.
while you sit on the sidelines and watch. It sounds like a group project in college where everyone waits for the one studious kid to do all the work.
It's exactly like that, but with nuclear weapons.
Exactly. And Mearsheimer argues this is actually a very rational, smart strategy, if you can pull it off. If two of your rivals fight a massive war and destroy each other while you stay at peace, you emerge as the strongest power without firing a shot.
But there's a risk, right? If everyone passes the buck, nobody stops the aggressor.
Precisely. That is the danger. Mearsheimer analyzes historical cases like prior to World War II, where states buck passed for too long, allowing Nazi Germany to get too strong before anyone really stepped in.
But the temptation to let someone else do the fighting is always there.
Always.
Now, there is a specific type of player in this game that we need to discuss because it connects back to that stopping power of water concept. The chapter is titled The Offshore Balancers. This seems to describe a very privileged position.
It is the ultimate privileged position. An offshore balancer is a great power that is physically separated from the main centers of conflict by water. The classic examples are Great Britain relative to Europe in the 19th century.
And the United States relative to Europe and Asia today.
That's right. Because they are behind the moat, they don't have to be in the scrum every day.
They can afford to hang back.
Correct. Their strategy is usually to stay out of continental conflicts unless absolutely necessary. They watch, they wait. They let the local powers on the continent balance against each other.
That sounds incredibly cynical. It's like watching a bar fight from the balcony and only jumping in if the winner starts coming up the stairs.
It is cynical, but Mearsheimer would say it's effective. The offshore balancer only intervenes, or comes on shore, when one power threatens to win the fight completely and become a regional hegemon.
That's when the US or UK traditionally steps in.
Exactly. To tip the scales back, prevent anyone from dominating, and then leave. They play the role of the spoiler. They ensure that no one achieves that regional hegemony status that would allow them to roam.
We've built up this picture of a machine. The machine runs on anarchy, it's fueled by the desire for hegemony, and the gears are these strategies of balancing and buck passing. The output of this machine, according to the chapter The Causes of Great Power War, seems to be, well, inevitable conflict.
That is the grim conclusion. Mearsheimer argues that war isn't an accident. It's not a policy failure. It is a structural inevitability. When a power thinks it can gain an advantage, or when a status quo power thinks it's about to lose its position, war becomes the rational choice.
So the security dilemma is inescapable.
In his view, yes. The security dilemma is the concept that anything I do to make myself safer, like building a bigger army, automatically makes you feel less safe. So you build an even bigger army, which makes me feel less safe.
It's a spiral.
It is. And because there is no 911 to call and say, hey, tell him to stop, the spiral often continues until it breaks into open war.
Now, this book came out in 2001. The final chapter is Great Power Politics in the 21st Century. At the time, he was making a prediction. Looking back now from our vantage point, what did he see coming?
He predicted that the holiday from history, we talked about at the beginning, the 90s optimism was just a pause. He predicted that as the distribution power shifted, as new great powers rose, specifically pointing toward Asia.
The old patterns of security competition would return, with a vengeance.
Yes. He argued that the rise of China, for example, wouldn't be peaceful simply because of trade. He predicted that China would act exactly like the United States did.
It would seek regional hegemony.
Because that is the only way to be safe. And the United States would react by trying to contain it, not because of ideology, but because of structure.
It's interesting because it strips away all the moral language we usually hear. We hear authoritarianism versus democracy or good versus evil. Mearsheimer saying, no, it's just power A versus power B in a cage match.
It's a very cold diagnostic lens. It suggests that even if you swap the governments, even if China was a liberal democracy, the structural pressures would still push these two powers into competition.
Which brings us back to the tragedy. The tragedy isn't just that war happens, it's that states are trapped in patterns they can't break.
They are prisoners of the Mac and the lack of a world government.
So as we wrap this up, I want to pose a question for you, for the listeners, to think about based on everything we've discussed. If Mearsheimer is right, and hegemony is the only true insurance policy, does that mean every rising power is automatically a threat?
That is the logical endpoint of the theory, isn't it? It implies that we can never truly welcome a new power to the table.
It seems so.
Right. Think about the tragedy of intentions. A rising nation might genuinely just want to grow its economy and be safe. They might have zero desire to invade their neighbors.
But the established powers.
The established powers cannot take that risk. They have to assume the worst. So they encircle and contain the rising power.
Which, ironically, makes the rising power feel threatened, proving they were right to be paranoid in the first place.
Exactly. The defense creates the offense. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy generated by the structure of the system.
That is a heavy thought to leave you with, but I think it's a necessary one. The tragedy of great power politics doesn't offer a lot of herp, but it offers a tremendous amount of clarity.
It is. It's the kind of book that once you read it, you can't unsee the patterns. You look at the news and suddenly you don't see speeches. You see balancing, buck passing, and the struggle for position.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new set of glasses to look at that map on your wall. Thank you, the learner, for listening.
Keep thinking critically.
Until next time.